Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining me for another episode of Weather Center Nazario. My name is David, out in the lovely sunshine state of Central Florida. Today is August 8, 2023. I have a few interesting new tidbits of weather to pass along to you, but before we take a deep dive into all things meteorology, please like, drop a comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed today's segment. Otherwise, with that being said, let's get started. Okay, everybody, so to kick things off, I have the National Hurricane Center homepage opened up just for a broad overview of what the tropical Atlantic looks like, and once again, they're not expecting any kind of development over the next 7 days, but I'm here to tell you that that could possibly be changing. Possibly. I use possibly very strong. We're going to get into that here in a second. But not looking at anything right now. We got some tropical waves out there, some convection out over the MDR, main development region. Nothing really going on that's crazy or anything worth pointing out. I will go over to windy.com towards the back end of this video. So let's get into what it is that I'm seeing that could possibly change things. So before you get confused by this conglomeration of weather information, by the way, I'm very excited that I have my camera set up. I'm stoked that I can finally be in the video. But anyways, looks like the 12Z Euro model is coming in. We can take a look at the new info, guys. Let's do this together. I haven't looked at this, so let's kind of digest it together, shall we? Where are you? There we go. Okay, so it looks like whatever could possibly form up there's some pretty decent model agreement for it, but it's going to be cycling out into the Atlantic. We got a possible fish storm on our hands as we get closer to the tail end of August. This is different from what we had been seeing, so what this tells me is that high pressure out over the mid-Atlantic is probably going to be weakening and back-building closer to the Azores, repositioning itself, allowing for that escape route for our system. Or we could be having another potent baroclinic system coming off the mid-Atlantic northeastern states of the CONUS that's going to help to erode whatever Bermuda high we have out there. But the main takeaway here is European ensembles are pinging on some kind of a circulation coming off the western tip of Africa and then moving through our mid-Atlantic basin. And, yeah, something's out there. Something could possibly be out there, and it's picking itself. I'm not too sure why our loop is so interspersed with data. Let me re-click and see if that changes it. Nope. So I guess we can kind of fill in the blank from 120 to 240 and 240 to 360. Anyways, let's go to the operational run. So this is a 12Z operational run of the Euro, and we're going to go ahead and fixate our attention to the easternmost extremity of the Atlantic. As you can see, there's our 1021 Bermuda high, kind of mid-Atlantic high. It's in between the Azores and Bermuda, but more of a Bermuda representation here. This is what's going to kind of drive our systems off to the west-northwest towards the southeastern states. I'm going to fast forward real quick. There it is. It's repositioned as an Azores high, which allows for that escape route that the ensemble members were looking at. As we go forward in time, here comes our next tropical entity off the western portions of Africa. All these blue shades here you can see is indicating lower pressure, anomalous lower pressure beginning to deepen in that general region. And as we go forward through time, the model wants to pick something up and spin it off to the west. There it goes, and you can see as we get towards the very tail end of the model, we get a lot of good dark shading with this. So that's the model trying to indicate that we have something spinning out there in the Atlantic, and it is expected to kind of get its act together, deepen a little bit. Don't anticipate much out of it just yet. This is, again, 240 hours out into the future, but it's worth noting that the model actually is carrying something from the coast through the MDR towards the Caribbean, just to the north of the Caribbean, as we've already seen previously this year, and trying to better organize it. You can also notice this representation on the mean sea level pressure precipitation at the very end of the European model. Let me go back. There we go. Let's update it. We'll follow it through time once again. This is... Sorry, folks. Let me rewind it. This is 2 a.m. August 12th, and as we get into the 13th, you can see this large bubble of lower pressure. This is our system right here as it plops into the eastern Atlantic and then begins to show itself. We get a stamp, 1,009 millibar low, proceeding off to the west at a very slow rate. This is now August 16th. It's still holding together. Same time as 4 days ago, 2 a.m. August 16th. We'll go forward to the end of the run, and you can see that we get some deepening. That's going on. We got a closed isopar, 1,007 millibar, tropical, whatever this could possibly be, button up against our mid-Atlantic high. It's once again kind of bouncing back and forth between the Azores here and the island of Bermuda, if you can kind of imagine. It's kind of underneath the isobar, isotax, or the isotherms right there, but it's out there, trust me. So this is going to continue off to the west-northwest, and what we'll be very keen to see is whether or not it finds that escape route and this high retreats back towards the Azores and allows for a northward trek. There's another little 1,011 millibar low just behind it, but nothing too impressive with that. This is our main feature that we're fixating on. We'll go over some of the parameters real quick, because the parameters are looking a bit more favorable this time around. We've noted 3 main ingredients, 3 main obstacles that a lot of our circulations have had to do battle with throughout much of the 2023 hurricane season. One of them being wind shear. El Nino is iconic for bringing on excessive amounts of wind shear to the Atlantic Basin, which is why I typically associate El Nino years with very lackluster hurricane seasons. I'm here to tell you guys that is a common misconception. I ran into a lot of common misconceptions, for example, with the monsoon out in the southwestern United States when I was stationed in Arizona doing the weather out there. A lot of folks used to think, oh, the monsoon equals rain. Well, El Nino equals no hurricane season. I'm here to tell you that's a big old false. We actually have seen through climatology and history that despite it being El Nino, that doesn't really do much to derail our hurricane season. It can definitely impact it and slow things down a little bit, kind of give us a bit of a weaker setup for hurricane season, weaker systems, more disorganized systems. But for those of you very familiar with 2004, where Florida had to suffer through the onslaught of 4 different major hurricanes, that was an El Nino year. So let's not count it out of the realm of possibility yet. History has shown us never to kind of assume the best or assume that we can let our guard down. As you can see here, we're getting to the tail end of the European run. Atlantic's looking pretty good. Atlantic's looking very good, actually. I mean, we have some trademark El Nino shear out there in the Caribbean, but even that's looking a lot weaker than what we've seen back when Brett, Cindy were alive in the MDR about a month ago. And as you go forward through time, you can see that we get some good diffluence aloft in the upper levels right over our little low pressure system there. And pay no mind to these wind bands here. I'll go forward a little bit more because you can see that those winds pick up and get a little aggressive. What this is showing actually is kind of a concentration of whatever this troughing is here that's providing a little bit of intense wind shear in the upper levels. But what tends to happen with these storms is they begin to develop some pretty good upward vertical motion in the center of circulation, which is what kicks off that intense convective activity that we see close to the eye wall once, it becomes tropical storm, a more organized hurricane. And what the models will pick up on is kind of the self-sustainment of these systems. So as that upward vertical motion begins to kick off, as you can see in the streamlines here, we get a clockwise spin around it. And what that does is help to create its own little pocket of wind shear, almost like a defense mechanism against anything else around the system as it begins to bubble up and brew into a more organized feature. So what the model is showing here is not necessarily that there's going to be wind shear that's going to impact the system. It looks like because of this aggressive-looking, we'll say, northeast to southwest-oriented trough axis here, there might be a little bit of 15, 20-knot wind shear in the upper levels that it will combat. But this is also showing that there's going to be some upward vertical motion with it, which will kind of cause the deepening at the surface we saw on the panel prior. You go through time and you can see that it begins to transition with the system as it begins to further organize. That's why we have this, we'll call it a shared energy region of wind shear between the millibar levels indicated here on the model platform. But you can even see in the streamlines that you get some good diffluence aloft over the system, and this is indicative of deepening down at the surface. You're getting a lot more, I wouldn't say a lot, it's 1,007 millibars, but you're getting some deepening, some organizing down in the low levels, and that's why you're seeing a bit more diffluence aloft in the form of that clockwise anticyclonic spinning in the upper levels of the atmosphere. So that's a good thing for the system itself. Not necessarily a good thing for us because that means we may have something on our hands when we get about 10 days out into the future, but it's good to see that the system's trying to maintain healthy breathing. That's exhaust right there is what we're seeing. And last but not least, we'll move over to our good old dry and wet air. This is going to be our relative humidity. Everyone's been talking a lot about, the dry air, the Saharan dust. Saharan dust will choke these systems out. So as you go forward in time, there it is, moving west. We can track it through time. You get a nice push of moisture off of Africa. And it gets very interesting towards the tail end of the loop. You can see that the dust kind of starts to wash itself out with that plume of moisture that comes off of Africa. And it kind of looks like the European model wants to use that as a life support for this circulation. That's why it continues to carry it off to the west as opposed to being smothered like everything else that we've seen up to this point. can even see to the northern extremity of it what was once shrouded in very, very dense wind shear. I mean, not wind shear, excuse me, dense dry air. You can see the very brown, coagulated-looking pocket of dry air, dense dry air at that, begins to wash out as that surge of moisture begins to interact with our low, and it kind of draws it in as a bit of a life force, if you will. You can see it starting to wash out, and that moisture starts to wrap around it. And again, we're so far into the future that anything's possible. This is probably going to update 12 hours from now. We're going to see something totally different on the model. If we don't, that's something that's worth talking about as we go through time and get closer to the weekend. But this is what you don't want to see. I'm not going to use the trademark line of this is alarming, but this is what you don't want to see when you want to, expect that these systems are going to continue to dissipate. Because the more moisture that you get wrapped up in a system, despite it interacting with dry air, the more it begins to self-sustain, as I said a few minutes ago. It begins to sort of create its own environment conducive for further organization and further strengthening. It gets to a point where outside influences no longer play as vital of a role in these systems. The hardest part is just getting going. It's kind of like a snowball effect for those of you who are still struggling to understand. If you push a snowball or a boulder down a mountain, it's going to slowly begin to accumulate snow until it begins to just kind of tumble on its own because it's created so much weight as it's gathered that snow, and it just continues to avalanche down towards the base of the mountain. Kind of the same principles here if you think about it, meteorologically. The more moisture, the more upward vertical motion we get, as we noticed in the wind shear model data just a panel ago, begins to create its own environment, its own little bubble of atmospheric conditions that are conducive for further strengthening. So this is something worth keeping an eye on. It's kind of interesting to see. I'll touch on the Canadian model real quick. Canadian model's been off and on with these systems as well. We'll go over to the mean sea level pressure and precip platform, and I'll keep it at the very end of the loop. And you can see that the Canadian model is also picking up on something. This is August 18th, 12Z. We have 1,010 millibar low dead center of the MDR, and then we have a pretty nice signature of 1,005 tropical disturbance right here. And I will spend about 30 seconds on this. What's interesting to note here is the precip field with these features. You can see the 1,010 millibar low doesn't have a whole lot organized with it, maybe some convective activity on the leading edge, but you can't really pick up on anything tropical. It's just got that 1010 low stamped with some rain associated with it, but then just upstream of it, that 1005 is looking very tropical. You have like this exhaust outlet right here pinwheeling into the center of circulation. So whether or not, I'm going to throw it out there again, caveat that, so you guys don't think I'm giving this the end-all be-all, but if this continues on for the next couple of model runs, it'll be interesting to see if it keeps this signature, because that's a pretty healthy structuring to a storm. I bet you if we switch over to the vorticity at 500, yeah, you can see that pinwheel look right there. You got the winds to the northern side of the rotation, I should say, on the northern side, and you got some inflow on the back side of it and the southern side of it. Some pretty good spinach in the upper atmosphere. That's looking very pinwheel, very iconic of a tropical system. Some good vorticity with that one, however, albeit compact, but that's looking pretty gnarly. Let's see if it matches up with our European model. Let me switch over, keep it at the same time, and yeah, there it is. Look at that. That's some good consistency. Actually, that's dead on, too. Let me switch back over to the Canadian. That's smack dab right where we're looking. Yeah, that's what you call good model consistency. Same time, pretty much the exact same location. So we'll see what happens over the coming days. Let's see if it'll hold it together. Last but not least, we'll go over to the icon, and we'll fast forward to the end. Once again, icon doesn't go as far out, but this is a pretty good model that helps pick up on at least preliminary circulation out there in the tropical environment. This is the 16th of August, and you can see that 1010 millibar low spinning up out there. So we got 3 different model platforms calling for the same thing. It looks like they're trying to get something going. It's been quiet for the last couple weeks. We've had some disturbances in some invest areas bubble up and then dissipate, unfortunately, because of the factors I mentioned earlier, the wind shear and especially the dry air. Truthfully, the dry air has been the main inhibitor. The wind shear has been kind of waxing and waning, and it's been more waning now as we've gone through the early parts of August, as you saw earlier in the forecast data that I pulled up. And once we can start kicking that dry air out of the atmosphere and these systems can get some oxygen to them, get some breaths, that's when I think they're really going to start to form the exhaust system I'd mentioned to you earlier. I'm going to pull up the GFS real briefly. GFS is once again doing its own thing. It's kind of just a conglomeration of all sorts of whatever it wants to do, the good old American model. We'll go to August 18th, and if you look out over the Atlantic, that MDR, there's nothing. Nothing out there. I mean, yeah, it tries to spin something up right there, a 10-13 low, but quickly washes it out, carries it as a bit of a, I guess, a tropical rain field, if you will. And then there's something further out in the run on August 24th, August 25th, that spins up and starts to move westward. And then we have whatever this is. It looks like post-frontal activity beginning to deepen off the coast of Florida over the Bahamas. This I'm not even going to worry about. This I'm not going to mention. I'm not going to say it's interesting or anything like that, because we're literally in as far of La La Land, or as far into La La Land of the GFS as we possibly could be. That's all I'm going to say about that. We have 3 fairly accurate model platforms, especially the Euro, calling for something over the next 7 to 10 days. I will go ahead and conclude episode 2 of Weather Center Nazario with showing you guys windy.com, just to give you an idea of what's going on out there in the Atlantic. You can see a pretty rough-looking ITCZ, intertropical convergence zone. You can see the southerly winds here and the northerly winds combining all through this area here, and that's probably why we have organized thunderstorm activity, not doing a whole lot out there. There's no spins. I mean, it looks like there's a bit of a tropical wave reflection out here in the low levels, but that's it. It's pretty quiet out there. Pretty quiet in the Atlantic front. So I will go ahead and conclude this video, bring us full circle back to the National Hurricane Center homepage. Guys, it's been a very bizarre hurricane season so far. I know it's still early. I know a lot of us think that kicking off August typically means, we'll be able to determine if we're going to have an active season or not. Please don't be lulled into a false sense of security. I mean, it's been fairly hit or miss so far. There's been a lot of circulations trying to spin up, but I think the best is yet to come. It may not be as crazy or as over the top as previous years, 2020, last year with Hurricane Ian and the other few systems that impacted the United States and really got their act together out in the Atlantic Basin. But I think the best is yet to come. I think that it's not over until it's over. So after that long-winded spiel, thank you all so much for watching. Thanks for tuning in for another segment of Weather Center Nazario. As I said in the introduction, like, comment, and please subscribe. Hopefully I can continue to bring you lovely, abundant amounts of weather information going forward. This is only episode 2. So be on the lookout for episode 3. Episode 3 is going to be a bit more ad-lib, more educational. I'd like to talk to you guys a bit about ensembles with a capital E. A lot of us meteorologists and weather forecasters love to talk a whole lot about ensembles and show you the ensembles and ensembles of ensembles during the tropical season, but I know a lot of you kind of get confused, and I dealt a lot of misconceptions during my time in the military with ensembles and what it is that they're actually indicating. So we'll talk a little bit about that on episode 3, but in the meantime, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you very soon. This is Weather Center Nazario, signing out.